A Different Galaxy. =RK=. Part 5. General Valentra's Office. GAR High Command. Coruscant. Early next morning, Kenobi and I made our way to the HQ and went to meet Talar. We found him in front of his office, sipping CF and speaking with a tall, regal-looking human admiral. The Navy officer had short-cropped black hair and a thin mustache on his gaunt face. While he was solidly built, the man looked positively exhausted. "You too?" Valentra glared at us. "What the crap am I supposed to do with you? Did you manage to engineer another headache specially for me since the Senate went crazy last night?" "Blame the Jedi and certain senators." I shrugged. "Oh, I do. The pair of you aren't off the hook either. I spent half the night answering inquiries from the Senate's Armed Forces Committee about the Confederate build-up, as if I know better than our various intelligence service, not to mention reassuring them that I'll be making use of your talents while making sure you don't learn any more sensitive information about the Republic's military capabilities." Talk about conflicting orders. You had fun, night, I take it? It was good to see that the Senate was continuing to piss off the Army. They were playing straight in my hands while trying to diminish the threat I may one day represent. Talar grimaced. It was a crippling waste of time. "Come with me." He waved us with his free hand, then nodded at the Navy officer. "This is Admiral Mark Jared. He's been trying to untangle the Navy's procurement for years now." "General Vale, General Kenobi. It's good to meet you in person. I've heard a lot about you." The Admiral offered us a hand and we shook it. "Only bad things, I hope? I do have a reputation to maintain," I quipped. "Yes, that's the problem," Obi-Wan muttered. "Good things as long as I'm not listening to some of my acquaintances in the Senate," Jared said. "How is the Navy build-up going?" Obi-Wan asked. "A bit better than expected. We'll be getting a significant number of acclimators complete and ready for deployment by the time the Separatists hit us. There are a couple of thousand escorts scheduled for completion during the next month, and that will give us a sorely needed boost, but we'll still be heavily outnumbered. While thanks to Kuat and Corellia we have at least 50% advantage in capital ship construction capacity, it took us too long to begin constructing Venotas at capacity. Even longer to expand the necessary industries, find trained personnel and expand the shipyards." Jared paused to breathe. "It will be at least 18 to 20 months before our industrial advantages could become decisive, not before we finish the next Venator construction cycle, and that can't happen before our ongoing construction is complete." Valentra nodded. "That's what we'll be talking about," he said as he led us deeper into the building. We passed through 2 checkpoints and entered a secure briefing room. There was a group of officers sitting around the round table, either chatting or browsing data pads. They were there for some time, if the few empty CF carafes were anything to go by. "General on deck." A black-haired commander stood at attention and shouted. The officers stopped what they were doing and all stood up and saluted. "At ease. Get a place and someone make sure we've got secure connection with the otherwise unoccupied members of High Command," Valentra ordered. I looked around. The room was covered with something resembling rubber, a sound-absorbing material, I guessed. Besides the table and chairs around it, the place was virtually empty. I sat next to Talar along with Obi-Wan and the Admiral. "First, introductions are in order," Valentra announced and nodded at Jared, who began. To the Admiral's left sat the commander who announced our entrance, one Adar Talon, a starfighter ace who worked under Plo Koon. The Jedi Master had sent him back to Coruscant so he could help in devising new small craft doctrine and help in the development of units that could survive and be effective in Guardian-dominated environment. While the introductions continued, he busied himself calling the members who couldn't be present in person. Next were a pair of captains, Tareen Screed and Jan O'Donnell. They introduced themselves, staff members working for Jared until their ships, Victory Star destroyers, came close to completion. From what I gathered, they had their time split between helping ensure that the Navy procurement didn't go to hell and training their command staffs in simulators. It wasn't an ideal arrangement, but the attack on the HQ a few months back practically decapitated the GAR High Command and cost us a lot of experienced officers. Screed was an aging officer with complexion identical to that of the clones. According to his service ribbons, he had been a part of the Judicial forces for years before the war began and had seen combat more than once. His short brown hair was mostly hidden by his uniform cap. O'Donnell had receding black hair, revealing a prominent forehead and accenting his large nose. Both of them wore the standard deep green naval uniform and had their medal ribbons proudly displayed on their chests. Beside the captain sat a human naval officer. Admiral Felix Dow. He introduced himself. His thin face made him look almost gaunt, not unlike Gerard. However, the middle-aged admiral appeared to have much more energy. His blue piercing eyes practically shone with it. "It's good to see you again, Admiral," I greeted Dow. I vaguely remembered him from Ryloth. He was in charge of a Venator division at the time. His ships didn't fare too well after being unfortunate enough to be targeted at the beginning of the engagement. I recall that he was wounded when his flag was crippled, but it was obvious Dow's wounds haven't slowed him down. "The same to you, General. I'm glad that you didn't decide to leave for Mandalore after last night. It would take much more than a group of misguided fearmongers to make me turn my back to the soldiers I've fought with for months now." My words were met with universal approval by the officers. The last officer was Navy 2. I'm Admiral Barton Coburn. He introduced himself with a gravel-like voice. The man appeared to be in his 60s. He had receding white hair and sharp light green eyes. As it turned out, we were going to discuss things with only two more people. One was Yularen, who was overseeing the repairs of the fleet we led above Geonosis. The last member of our little gathering was another familiar face, Joanna Holt. She was making her way to Corellia along with her ship and surprisingly wore the insignia of a Rear Admiral. "Congratulations about the promotion, Admiral." I smiled at the Corellian woman. I did owe her one, even if I planned it. She did come through and saved my ass on Mandalore. "General Vale." She nodded. "I hear things on Coruscant got quite interesting with your return." "Too interesting." Obi-Wan snorted. "I can't help it but notice I'm the only Jedi in here." "Former Jedi?" Tilar gave him a wan smile. "After yesterday, I don't exactly trust the Jedi not to make a mess of things. Besides, it's been months since they were actually in command of the Army or Navy, no matter how many of them are generals. We make up the majority of surviving Republic High Command as well as highly ranked allied officers. If we're to work together without criffing up by the numbers, we need to reach an understanding," Admiral Coburn stated. "After the Senate had its temper tantrum yesterday, we need to choose a new commander Republic Field Forces, to fill in the shoes of General Vale. I'm open to suggestions." Valentra spoke. "This last year, I've fought along Force users a lot," Admiral Dow said. "While a lot of them have no idea what to do in command of anything larger than a squad and should have never been given the authority they had at the start of the war, those who know what they're doing have some advantages the rest of us simply lack. With General Vale no longer an option and the Jedi in disarray, I nominate General Kenobi for the position." I agree. While he had some rough edges, I believe Obi-Wan Kenobi is up to the task. I offered my support and earned myself a glare from the former Jedi. "If it had slipped your minds, I'm no longer a Jedi and became Mandalorian the same evening he did." Obi-Wan pointed at me. He didn't sound thrilled by the idea of being put in charge of all combat force. "Oh, we know." Valentra looked at Kenobi. "You might be a Mandalorian, but aren't Mandalore, and that's what's important. All of us has home worlds that hold our loyalty alongside the Republic, and it hasn't been an issue. While General Vale as a leader of your people might have divided loyalties, yours are as secure as our own." Obi-Wan frowned at Tilar. "You planned this, didn't you?" "I'll admit a part of it is making a point to the Senate. However, if we didn't believe you up to the job, we wouldn't offering it, General," Valentra explained. "Do you all agree with this?" Obi-Wan asked and looked around the table. "That's a Republic internal issue." Admiral Holt shrugged. "From what I hear, you should be able to do the job." "We discussed you last night," Admiral Gerard added. "Besides, all of us currently have duties we can't in good conscience leave. You however haven't been actually commanding since Geonosis, so you're free to take the job. While we can't force you to take the position, it's our recommendation that you do so." Admiral Coburn offered his support to the idea. "If I didn't know better, I would be sure this was your idea." Obi-Wan glared at me. "This time I'm not guilty as charged. You're aware that the Jedi Council won't take this lightly, right?" Obi-Wan tried. "The Jedi's internal politics aren't of any concern to this body. The Council already did more than enough to jeopardize the war effort." Valentra grimaced. "Look at the positives. If you take the offer, you'll be better placed to keep me in check if I went on the deep end. I beamed at Obi-Wan. There's that. Kenobi groaned. I know I'll regret it, but fine. I accept. Congratulations, General Kenobi. I'll make sure that all the paperwork is in order so you can assume your new responsibilities before the end of the day, Dodonna announced. Now, with that out of the way, item the second. General Vale, in order to ensure proper coordination between the GAR and our Corellian and Mandalorian allies, you'll be taking command of all allied forces along with contingent of our own, Valentra announced. All? My eyebrows went up at that. This was another slap in the face of both the Senate and the conservative Jedi. Well, as Mandalore, you're already the ultimate authority as far as your people are concerned. You did a good job leading Corellian forces at Geonosis, and the same is true about various ground units not nominally under GAR control. The Anxian Rangers and Sarmasi Lancers. I nodded. While I had little interaction with their commanders, there were no real issues when they were under my command. Those two outfits were a strange case, not really a militia or a planetary defense force, which were usually simply placed under the overall command of the GAR officers in the area. Instead, the Rangers and Lancers were long-standing military units that worked alongside the planetary defense forces of their respective home worlds but technically weren't part of them. What am I looking at as Corellian and Republic assets? I asked. Admiral Holt's new command after her ship goes a partial refit on Corellia along with the units you were supposed to command before Geonosis, the 11th Legion and attached fleet elements, Valentra stated. Tilar had obviously been quite busy lately. May I request that the remnants of the 501 stay placed under my command? I've worked with them before and we have an excellent rapport. That shouldn't be an issue. You'll be getting additional staff officers to help you run the Combined Allied Command or whatever we end up calling that damn thing. This completes item the second, and now we come to the primary reason why we're here, Valentra agreed. We all know that in 2 months the Separatists will have enough new construction coming online to create from scratch multiple sector fleets. They're going to throw them at us as soon as they can. According to all our intelligence sources, the Confederacy is currently overhauling their military command, cutting off the dead weight and busy deciding how to use their new ships against us. We won't know for some time what they plan. We may learn it the hard way, because a lot of our sources within the Confederacy had gone dark. This is the primary reason why we're gathered today, to decide how to meet the coming enemy offensive. General Vale. Valentra put me into the spotlight. Yesterday, before my meeting with the Senate, General Valentra informed me of the estimated enemy strength. Even with some escorts and a lot of acclimators coming online soon, we'll be on the wrong end of a significant numerical disparity, much more than can be made up by the superior quality of our capital ships. If our fears are realized, the Confederacy is going to put competent people in charge across the board and give them largely free rein in prosecuting the war. I paused. In the past few weeks, Admirals Trench, Ningo and Tonith had been recalled to Raxus and we haven't heard from them since. Can we be so lucky that the Separatists dispose of them for us as unreliable? Dow asked. Unknown. We can't rely on such a good fortune unless we have a solid proof that they're all dead or imprisoned. Coburn rumbled. We have to plan for the worst, competently led determined enemy that outnumbers us significantly. That's my thought too. Valentra added. I briefly discussed the situation with General Vale yesterday. While I agree with his thoughts on the matter, there are issues. He looked at me. Even if we go with the conservative estimates, the Separatists will be able to hit us across the board, tie up a lot of our forces and then concentrate overwhelming numbers on their primary objectives. Lacking solid intelligence on their intentions, we'll have to decide where to reinforce and dig in and which systems we can't afford to defend unless we wish to have a significant chunk of the Navy defeated in detail. I turned my attention to the terminal built in front of my seat and activated the holo projector that was in the center of the table, then called in an up-to-date map of the galaxy. If I was in charge of the Confederacy's military, this state of affairs would be unacceptable. I pointed at the 4 big parts in which the CIS-controlled space was divided. One of the first things I would be doing with all those brand new ships would be to connect the various separatist territories, then deny the Republic use of the main hyperlanes to the Outer Rim. That part is a no-brainer. While it would be good if we could keep the Confederate territories divided, I believe that would be a waste of resources at this time. The exception is the Central Corridor here. I highlighted it with 3 blue circles. If we lose the hyperlanes in these areas, Camino will be cut off along with a significant part of our holding in the mid and outer rim. It's also a lot of territory to cover. The separatists will find it much easier to connect their other holdings and secure the lanes between them. Admiral Coburn noted. Even if we can't stop them at any given location, our fleets will have a lot of space to maneuver, retreat if necessary, and be ready to assist us in opening the lanes once our Vinotas are ready. The same can't be said for the expanse sandwiched between Hut space and these two separatist territories. The old human's hands flew to his terminal and he circled the large piece of the mid-rim he had in mind. What about our territory to the west? Admiral Gergerard asked. They're practically cut off, even if the Confederacy has to keep heavy forces to contain them. If they have the spare ships, they might send them to secure the area. Once our naval units in the region are tried enough, the Confederacy can ignore the sector and thus free a lot of assets. It's the same with the pocket to the far northeast. I lit up the areas in red. Mon Calamari too. As things stand, our only way to reinforce them is through Hut space. Given its location, if the separatists decide to hit some of the neutrals in the area, they can cut off the system and reduce it when convenient. You have a suggestion, I reckon, Coburn stated. An idea that the Senate won't find pleasing. We need to pull off as many assets as we could from the west. Even with the hyperlanes under enemy control, if our naval units in the region can quietly concentrate, they stand a good chance to punch through. At the same time, I would like to leave a lot of light recon element in the area. As for our ground units, they should either be extracted or concentrated on planets with planetary shields where they can hold out for a long time even if the enemy has orbital control. You suggest abandoning a lot of territory. Dow frowned. True. Most of those worlds are of no strategic importance for the war and we need the Navy deployed where it matters. We'll need to keep a corridor to Camino open at all costs, or at least for as long as we can keep the planet safe. If the enemy dedicates enough assets on an attack there, we may lose it anyway. We can't afford to send too many reinforcements there, not if we're to keep a route to the core open at the same time. What about Mandalore? Coburn asked. It's very close to separatist-controlled space and they will be launching offensives in the area to link up their territories and put pressure on us. A fleet and beings standing under the planetary shields. If reinforced and given some heavy equipment, my people will turn any ground assault in a bloodbath for the enemy. Given its position on the trade lanes, we'll need to retake the system sooner rather than later if we're to wage war in the galactic northeast. That's not what expected. Coburn gave me a nod of respect. I was fearing you would want us to keep the system out of Confederate hands at all cost. I would want any uninvited guests kicked out promptly once the Vinotas are ready, but that's it. It would take us a few years to rebuild our fleet and will be slowed down by pulling down to the surface the most important parts of the space infrastructure, but having Mandalore under siege for a few months won't be too bad. I smiled grimly. Most of our people are spread all over the galaxy even if I gave the call for them to come back. As long as we can keep the bulk of our planet-side industry intact, we'll recover. Besides, we simply can't afford to tie up too many ships keeping my home safe. I pointed at the map. If the enemy is smart and we can't afford to expect anything less, they will be coming after our industrial nodes. Kuwait, Corellia and our smaller shipyards. The big question is, where will they concentrate their efforts? The two industrial powerhouses? Can they afford to strike both systems and hope to succeed? Perhaps only one and raids on our other shipyards? What if they go after Coruscant again? Gergerard asked. Unlikely unless they decide for all or nothing, throw on the dice. Yet, we can't neglect such a possibility. Our friends in the Senate won't let us if we tried anyway. For all we know, whoever is running things on the separatists' side nowadays might think it's a good idea. They might feint that way anyway to draw forces from their real targets too. Coburn thought aloud. A strike towards Ord Mantell, for example, could be just a feint, an attempt to secure better positions for the next phase of the war, clearing up the way for following assaults on our industrial nodes in the mid-rim, or even a prelude for a strike towards Coruscant. The same goes if they secure Mandalore and move up the hyperlane leading towards the core. He lit up parts of the map in orange. We'll have to keep a strong reserve force against such an attempt. I conceded. What concerns me is how close Corellia and Kuwait are to enemy-held territory. If the enemy finally manages to take Antar and then Queller, they'll have a clean run to Cato Nemodia and then use it as both a supply base and a forward staging area. Then all they have is to break through whatever we have in place at Komentor and the route to Kuwait is open. Alternatively, securing Kalodar will give them a route to Corellia. I won't be surprised if they do both just to force us reinforce both systems. The nature of the hyperlanes in the region is such that once we know where they're sending the bulk of their forces, it would be days until we can shift our navy from the other threatened system. That could be more than enough time to lose a lot of industrial capacity and incomplete construction. Our friends in the Senate will want us to reinforce both systems heavily, Valentra said. That's why I want to strip everything we can from strategically unimportant systems. I shrugged. Like Revan did against your own people all those years ago, Dow stated. It worked. I pointed out. As I see it, we'll need to keep a decent-sized reserves at Coruscant, Ord Mantell, Corsis and Denon at the very least, along with reinforcing Corellia, Kuwait and Camino with whatever we can scrape up. In addition, placing additional forces at either Kalindra or Naboo so they can be ready to fend off any attacks on the lanes in the area would be prudent. Obi-Wan spoke after listening to the discussion and carefully examining the map. Reinforcing Christophsis will help us contest that region and we can pull the naval elements there back towards Camino if necessary. That sounds good. Valentra must. Ultimately it's your call after all. Finding all the assets we're going to need will be harder. I'll back you up when you decide it's time to talk with the Chancellor about it, I said. We'll need to craft proper contingency plans first. Gerard pointed out. True. I conceded. Let's start, shall we? Ancient Sith and Other Monsters. =RK=. Part 1. Guest Quarters. Mandalorian Embassy. Coruscant. It's been a long time since I had the opportunity to kick back, relax and watch such an entertainment. I sighed and took a long pull from an iced bottle of Corellian ale. I had crashed on a comfortable couch in the living room of a small apartment meant for visiting clan leaders if they hadn't made other arrangements for their trip to Coruscant or government officials here on official business. The place was tastefully decorated, there was no clash between modern leather furniture, high-tech communication gear and stands proudly displaying ancient weapons and armor. Holographic recreations of painting depicting moments of Mandalorian glory could be seen on most walls, making me feel nostalgic. A monitor taking up most of the wall across the room displayed the news, which were frankly hilarious. A cute red-haired human woman was on, narrating a video of a protest near the Senate. I could clearly see beings from at least 24 different species shouting questions and generally being rowdy. They were faced by a solid block of Coruscant security guards, clad in heavy anti-riot gear. The first two ranks had shields and shock batons, with those behind them armed with various crowd control devices, nets, foam grenades, low-powered sonic blasters meant to only stun. This is merely the closest protest to the Senate building, which explains the extraordinary heavy presence of security force. The anchor, Halcyon, explained. By last count there were at least 200 protests on Coruscant alone, many of which turned into full-blown riots. The image changed and I could see a riled-up crowd throwing itself against a cordon of riot troopers. They slammed into a locked shield wall, then began to fall as shock batons moved into a well-drilled unison and slammed at the first line of the rioters. Electricity arched and bodies crumbled. Foam grenades arched above the heads of the shield bearers and detonated among the crowd. The fast expanding and almost instantly hardening substance stopped the forward momentum of the rioters, allowing the security agents to knock out the most eager or foolish of them and push the crowd back. What does the protesters want, Victoria? An old Rhodian asked. An explanation, Borsk. Most of the peaceful ones appear to be ordinary citizens concerned by what's been happening in the Senate in the past week. The removal of General Vale from his post in command of all Republic field forces came in mere hours before our intelligence services revealed a report citing what naval construction the Separatists will complete and have available to use against us before the end of next month. That news certainly had me concerned, Victoria. The Rhodian nodded sagely. All those protests caught me off guard. While at least some were out there in support of Sylvaris and the Jedi, most people wanted me back in charge of the military so I could keep those dastardly separatists out in the Outer Rim, where they couldn't cause trouble for the good people in the core worlds. No one put things in exactly those words, yet the Republic as a whole was far too calm as long as the fighting was mostly contained beyond the Inner Rim. Attitude like that was a symptom of the problems that persuaded a huge percentage of the Outer Rim to support the Confederacy's bid for succession even if it meant war. The problem wasn't a new one. During the war between the Sith Empire and the Republic, the Coruscant did write off the outer territories after they either fell in our hands or were beyond the old Republic's ability to properly supply and reinforce. Nowadays, those same worlds were much more developed and densely populated, and they had more than enough of being considered second-class citizens by many people and, more importantly, institution in the Republic. Kenobi assumed the post vacated by General Vale. While our military analysts were pleased with that turn of events, and despite the fact that it calmed down some of the people out there protesting, the decision remains controversial. The Rhodian said. Certain senators, led by Lyra Silvaris, opposed that choice and made a motion for General Kenobi to be immediately removed from the post. The Cathar senator cited as a reason the fact that the former Jedi is a close personal friend of Mandalore and a Mandalorian himself. During an emergency session earlier today, she said that General Kenobi might act as little more than the voice of Mandalore, and it would be unclear if he could keep the Republic's interests at heart. She repeated the accusations leveled by Jedi Masters Teen and Piel against their former colleague. I had it on the best authority that the circus in the Senate hadn't really abated. Since he got his new job, Obi-Wan spent one morning and 2 afternoons answering questions about the Republic's readiness to meet and crush the expected Separatists' offensive. When, despite his best efforts, Kenobi let it slip that it wasn't going to be possible to hold on all territory we were supposed to be protecting, not before the Venatas were ready, only made things worse. When our contingency plans got ready and we presented a carefully edited version to the committee overseeing the military, all hell was going to get loose. I was hoping to be away from Coruscant for the fallout. It was high time I tracked Zash and saw what bind she got herself in. More than a few vague but ominous dreams I had in the last few days pointed in that direction. We'll get back to the upheaval both here on Coruscant and across the core in our evening program. Now, we're back to the trial that has the whole Republic watching with bated breath. Victoria beamed at the camera. Officially, as a witness for the prosecution and Anakin's commanding officer at the time of his kerfup, I had nothing to do with the trial until I was summoned, which was scheduled for tomorrow. Unofficially, the reporters were useful for once and made sure I knew exactly what was happening. Just in case I had called a favor with my colleagues in intelligence and they were feeding me reports on how the things were going with the tribunal, 5 generals and Navy captains who were stuck on Coruscant for the time being and thus could be bothered to be tapped as a jury. At least the Navy had it for Anakin for sure, which was troublesome. I would have to give quite the good speech in order to convince them that Skywalker's life would be better spent out on the battlefield instead rotting in jail or getting shot. The picture changed again, and this time I was seeing a courtroom. A camera caught Anakin's priceless expression as the full charges were read aloud. He looked half stunned. The prosecution was throwing almost everything at him, sans treason and cowardice in the face of the enemy. The screen zoomed out to show the whole courtroom. It wasn't particularly impressive. In front was the judge's stand with a nearby podium for witnesses. To the right sat the jury, all looking properly grim in their parade uniforms. Then there were 2 rows of benches for the prosecution, accused and defense, along with any interested parties that had the right to observe. I saw Palpy's hand in making the trial public. Doing so achieved multiple goals for him. It obviously further isolated Anakin, making him into a pariah and thus an easier target for turning. I was sure Sidious wouldn't miss the opportunity to further tarnish the Jedi Order in the perception of the public, and last and not the least, the trial was meant as a distraction from the circus happening in the Senate, and those were just the most obvious reason, even if the last didn't pan out as well as the Chancellor might have hoped. I knew Palpy was busier than ever this last week. The camera zoomed onto a figure that stood behind Anakin. It was Padme, flanked by a GAR security detail. Officially, that was to keep her safe from further separatist assassination attempts. Unofficially, it was a bid from me to change the public perception of Amidala. I didn't need her seen as the noble pacifist everyone knew. Instead, I wanted her to be considered a woman changed by her experiences and driven into a firm support of the war by a monstrous enemy. Palpy wasn't the only one who could pay PR firms after all. I saluted the screen when Rex was called on the stand. The video skipped forward to the interesting part. Commander Rex, you've been serving under General Skywalker since the first weeks of the war. What can you tell us about your experience as his subordinate? The prosecutor asked. Rex stood at parade rest and I was sure he struggled not to glare at Anakin. General Skywalker. He was different, sir. He got the job done, no matter the odds we faced. Rex paused. He earned our loyalty. We trusted him and would have followed him into the 9 Corellian hells if he asked. The clone's tone was emotionless, almost dead. Trusted him? The prosecutor repeated. Do you trust him now? No, sir, Rex stated flatly. Why not? He destroyed that trust along with most of the 501st Legion on Geonosis, sir. It's a good soldier's duty to die if necessary. It's the duty of a good commander to spend the lives of his subordinates wisely. If they have to die, it should be because that's the best way to achieve the objective. The best way to win. Rex paused and his voice was chock-full with pain and anger. What General Skywalker, the commander practically spat the name, did was waste our lives. Almost a full dozen good ships. 30,000 soldiers. All gone. Not to win a battle, or gain a vital objective. Not to save civilians or our brothers in arms from dying. This time Rex looked at Anakin and glared. We had to die because he didn't think. Because General Skywalker had to walk into an obvious trap. We had to die for nothing. Sir. I see. Commander, please lead us through the sequence of events that led to your crash landing on Geonosis. That was something I was painfully familiar with. I was one of the first people to receive a report on how Anakin managed to get a part of my fleet to go and commit a very expensive if ultimately somewhat useful suicide. He simply told them that he was following orders and they trusted him, a reasonably competent Jedi, not to get them killed unless it was for a very good reason. =RK=. Part 2. Courtroom 3A. Republic Judge Advocate Building. Coruscant. Next day found me standing on the witness stand, ready to answer questions after I swore to tell the truth and confirmed that I was aware of the consequences if I lied my ass off. It was time to see if my shenanigans with the Intel folks were going to pay out and salvage something from the Skywalker fiasco. I went through the obvious questions more or less on autopilot, summarizing my interactions with Anakin and the events that led to Geonosis in my own words. I did my best to make Skywalker look better adjusted and a less of a loose cannon that he really was to set up the stage for answering some questions that were carefully suggested to the defense. I have no more questions, Your Honor. The prosecutor gave me a satisfied nod. The defense can ask its questions. The judge announced. General Vale, in your opinion as General Skywalker's former commanding officer, why do you believe he undertook his action above Geonosis? In hindsight, Anakin's decision, his desperation, while unacceptable, is at least understandable. Unfortunately, at the time I was unaware of the full extent of his situation. I paused, giving the illusion I was gathering my thoughts, while using the Force to divine what would be the best way to answer. While not a foolproof way to do things, doing so was giving me a not insignificant advantage. Otherwise, things might have turned out differently, I sighed in regret. What was that situation exactly? The defender perked up. I know that given my complicated relationship with members of the Jedi Council, my words must be taken with a grain of salt. I made sure I looked apologetic. It was shortly before the first battle of Geonosis and the Star of the War, that Anakin's mother back on Tatooine was kidnapped by Sand People. I'm sure you'll wonder how that tragic event has any relevance on General Skywalker's actions above Geonosis. I smiled sadly. That's correct, General. The judge stated. However, I'll allow this line of questioning for now. Thank you, Your Honor. I inclined my head towards the judge. Thanks to his abilities as a Jedi, Anakin was aware that something had happened to his mother even if he hadn't been in contact with her ever since he became a part of the Jedi Order. He took his concerns to an available Jedi Master he trusted and asked for help. For permission to go to Tatooine and save his mother. A reasonable course of action, wouldn't you say? My smile got sadder still. Certainly more reasonable than his actions above Geonosis. The prosecutor quipped, earning himself a pointed look from the judge. Sorry, Your Honor. That was out of turn. Yes, General. Quite reasonable. I take it what happened next helps to explain why my client was less than reasonable during his second visit to Geonosis. Less than reasonable. It took some effort of will not to laugh. That's certainly an understated way to put it. Anakin's request was denied. He was told that he should simply let go of his attachments. That his mother dying would be a good thing even if not in those precise words. I paused for effect. I don't think that many of you would be surprised to learn that Anakin ignored that advice and did indeed go to Tatooine to find his mother. That shows a pattern of insubordination and disregarding orders. By doing so, he endangered Senator Amidala, and it was his job to protect her at the time. The prosecutor objected. Did he? The defender countered. The good senator was in no danger on Tatooine. It could be argued that she was safer there because that world was probably the last place the Confederate assassins after her would have looked. The senator was only in danger when she decided to go with my client to Geonosis to help his Jedi Master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was in captivity at the time. I'm not sure if you're trying to help the defendant or damning him with faint praise. The judge looked at me. Is there a point to this story? While I can see some parallels, it doesn't really help the accused. I'm almost done, Your Honor. While what I'm telling you certainly won't clear General Skywalker from all charges, I hope it might prove a mitigating circumstance to be taken under advisement when his sentence is decided, I said smoothly. I'll allow it. As a trained Force user yourself, you certainly have a better insight in the defendant's thought process than we do, the judge said. Thank you. What happened is Anakin finding his mother in a terrible condition. She had been tortured to the brink of death. I looked sadly at Skywalker. She died in his arms moments after they reunited. Why that's important? Senator Amidala, Anakin Skywalker's wife, was placed in not a dissimilar position. She was in pain he could feel even through the distance of space, and both the Jedi and GAR officers advised against an attempt to secure a suspected antidote that was supposed to be held at a fortified location on Geonosis. My and the other officers' reasoning was that the information about the cure was deliberately leaked to us and was nothing more than a trap and a way to bring General Skywalker closer to falling to the dark side. While I hope that the Jedi had similar concerns, now that I know their track record with people close to Anakin, I'm not so sure, I said in a low voice. Knowing what had happened to his mother, I would have certainly approached the situation from a different angle. Explained my reasoning better. How so? The defender asked. In hindsight, I can see how Anakin believed that history was repeating itself. How a woman he loved dearly, the wife who was his primary reason to fight so hard and valiantly for the Republic, was discarded and left to suffer and die. How none of us cared about her fate and simply expected him to swallow another loss and do nothing even if it was in his power to try. I shook my head. While his past doesn't absolve General Skywalker of responsibility for his actions, I firmly believe that what happened can't be laid squarely on his shoulders. I know that the facts of the case are clear. That Anakin simply can't be cleared of the charges. Doing so would mean spitting at the grave and sacrifices of every man and woman who had ever fought for the Republic. Yet, if I may be so bold, might I make a suggestion to the jury about the judgment they're about to render at the end of this trial? Given your service to the Republic and your role as General Skywalker's commanding officer at the time of the events in question, I have no trouble granting such a request, General Vale. Thank you, Your Honor. I believe it's clear to everyone that actions have consequences. That is something especially important for maintaining discipline and avoiding various disasters in a military organization like the Republic Armed Forces. Yet, there are different ways to make that lesson stick. To give justice to the people who died above Geonosis. In my professional opinion, while a prison term or worse might be well deserved given General Skywalker's actions, such a sentence would be less than ideal given our circumstance. As we're all painfully aware, we're at war. One that is going to get uglier and even more vicious before the situation improves. Because of that, my professional recommendation is that you consider an alternative sentence for General Skywalker. I paused. The judge had to silence the observers who were getting louder and louder as my tale unfolded. Please explain your reasoning, General. The judge ordered once order was restored. Right now, I don't trust General Skywalker with command. Perhaps I won't trust him in a position of authority ever again, I stated sadly. However, that doesn't change a simple fact. He is a handy with that lightsaber of his, and his abilities with the Force can be a powerful power multiplier. I suggest the following. Whatever sentence General Skywalker receives to be replaced with a mandatory service in the Army as a common soldier so his abilities could be put to use saving Republic lives. He owes both the Army, Navy and the Republic itself more than 30,000 lives. Give him the opportunity to save at least that many of our soldiers. If he breaks any regulation without an excellent reason, if he goes rogue again or do something else out of bounds, then his original sentence will go back into effect. No matter if it is a life sentence or death penalty. Give the man an opportunity to redeem himself, that's all I ask of you. The resulting uproar forced the judge to have the observers removed by military police. Hopefully my speech was going to keep Anakin's head away from the chopping block and out of Palpy's hands. Otherwise, I would have to dispose of Skywalker in a short order to avoid further complications. On the bright side, even if the jury turned out unreasonable, I still might retain Padmé's political support. Well, as long as I don't have to put down her husband, Ancient Sith and Other Monsters. =RK=. Part 3. Captain's Quarters. Cruiser Remembrance. En route to Tython. Hyperspace. Arranging to make myself scarce for a week or two was harder than anticipated. It took citing my duties as Mandalore, talking with Horus about covering for me and a few 20-hour days while I helped Obi-Wan and company with crafting some contingency plans. Even more deception was required so I could slip from both Republic and Jedi surveillance, including half of my Mandalorian guards running interference. Yet, the scheme was more or less successful and I found myself on board of the first silencer-equipped ship since the Great War ended. Bo and the most trustworthy of the security detail she created for me came too. I had the nagging feeling that their help would be needed at our destination. Once we landed, the cruiser went into hyperspace before we had a chance to disembark our shuttle. Captain Trek, it's good to see you in again. I greeted the man who ran my clandestine operations. The same to you, sir. Ma'am. We had a close call on Mandalore. Trek grimaced. From what he reported, it was a sheer luck that his transport survived after finding itself between Grievous' fleet and the defending forces. The clone saluted and sent a lieutenant to show my Mandalorians to the barracks and mess hall. I'm glad to inform you that the Remembrance is fully operational, Trek announced. His voice brimmed with pride over a job well done. Please follow me to my quarters where we can talk freely. Lead the way, Captain. Anything I need to know since our last chat? I asked. We tested the weapon in an asteroid field while awaiting your arrival, General. While there are some trouble with the targeting software, the silencer performed satisfactory, the captain said. Splendid work, Trek. Give my regard to your people. You all outdid yourselves. I praised him. In my experience, a properly measured use of the carrot and stick method worked best for motivating people. Going full retard and murdering your minions for no good reason just to encourage a tiny bit of increased productivity tended to be less than efficient in the long term, at least when you had competent people running things. Soon enough we reached our destination and Trek invited us in. His quarters were a bit bigger than the rooms where the rest of the ship's officers made their home away from home, but beyond a few knickknacks he had picked while running errands for me all across the galaxy, the place was no different from that on other Vinotas, well if you didn't count the elaborate CF machine in the corner. Speaking about cruisers, making sure I got my hands of a handful of them to modify with experimental tech was a pain and half in the ass. Hopefully the silencer would perform as well as I expected, because otherwise I would be having a lot of issues with my friends in intelligence who arranged for the ships in the first place. Please make yourselves comfortable. Can I offer you something? CF, tea perhaps? Trek asked. CF will be all right for me. Bo? I asked my wife. I'll take a cup too. So are you going to tell us where are we going? My wife asked. There's proper information security and then there's your latest shenanigans. Just a moment. Couldn't risk the Jedi hearing about it. I apologized. We're going to be saving my former master. As in the Sith Lord who trained you? Bo frowned at me. Who's supposed to be dead, if I'm not mistaken. Technically she's been kinda immortal for a few hundred years before I met her. Because that makes everything better. My wife groaned. I had the sneaking suspicion I wouldn't be getting lucky tonight. Complicated for certain. I quipped. We'll be rescuing her because? Bo asked and glared at me. A very good question. I believe she has answer we might need. Besides, I kinda owe her one. I frowned. I think. While Zash tried to possess my body, something that didn't really work for her thanks to my buddy Kem, she was very useful after that misunderstanding. Zash did help me rebuild my body and retain my sanity after I criffed up like a champion in pursuit for power. We're going where exactly? Bo sighed. This I going to be bothersome, I just know it. She muttered quietly. Tython, it was where the Jedi of old ran to after the Empire burned down their temple during the sack of Coruscant. According to some histories I've read, it was the seat of the Jedi, the precursors of both the Jedi and the Sith. I hope you'll be able to get us there, sir. Trek added his 2 credits. From what I could find, the system has been unreachable ever since the hyperlanes leading there collapsed a long time ago. Once you get us to the coordinates I sent you, I should be able to plot us a safe course, I said. With Zash acting as a beacon through the Force and decent star charts, it should be doable. Trek simply nodded and offered us our cups. Damn, I got to get myself one of those machines. The CF was excellent. With the pleasantries out of the way, I would like a status report, Captain. I ordered. As you wish, sir. Military, infrastructure or special projects first? Trek asked. Special. The operation on Yavin proceeds apace. We've got the basic colony up and running and our new guests have settled in nicely. That was one project that I would have to find some help with, unless something changed radically and likely for the worse. It didn't look like that I would have time to properly train the nucleus of my planned new Sith. Plus, I really didn't look forward to teaching kids the basics. Perhaps once the war was done and Arya and Jabo's training was complete I could delegate. Still, that was one long-term project, and the few kids I managed to retrieve while everyone was after the future Jedi younglings were still babes in arms, so to speak. Good. Status on your archaeological digs? I wasn't sure if I should find this amusing or sad. Digging up bunkers I personally created for rainy day was time-consuming effort, often requiring a lot of searching around even with my instructions. At some places the geography had changed significantly in 3,500 years. Not to mention that more than a few places had actually self-destructed after someone tried to loot them. The same was true for the Loki Imperial caches that I could recall. Still, the fact that Trek's men were able to retrieve the chips that made the silencer possible more than made up for the time and resources invested in this operation. That would be true even if we didn't recover anything else useful, which wasn't the case. After all, I didn't conjure the schematics for the basilic droids and other goodies for my Mandalorians from thin air. We simply lack the necessary resources to seek Force sensitives for future training. The few we've located was more due to luck than anything else. We encountered them while browsing the black markets for Jedi or Sith artifacts. I have a list of what we've recovered. Trek grimaced. Unfortunately, we simply are unable to confirm if the artifacts are genuine. Some do feel weird on close inspection, but if it's the Force or something else. The clone shrugged. I'll be inspecting them once I have the time. Hopefully that endeavor hasn't been a complete waste of time and money. Even after taking over a portion of Coruscant's underworld and placing a few of my agents and folks from intelligence in charge, to look for Sith saboteurs and spies trying to infiltrate us that way, of course, not to mention the taking over the 2-bit pirate's treasure and all his blackmail information, I still found myself with less liquid assets that I liked. Industry? I inquired. We've located 2 suitable systems so far. As far as we can determine, they're unknown to the galaxy at large. One is actually quite close to the jump-off point where we're heading, and its location in the deep core is better. The other is in the unknown regions. As you specified, the systems do have dense natural asteroid fields, complete with a lot of useful resources, and the stellar geography is such that access to them is limited to just a few useful approaches. However, until we have the necessary resources, anything but establishing outposts would be unfeasible. Send me the complete data on the locations. I think we'll share the one in the core with the Republic. A secret shipyard system could come in handy if the war drags out, and it would be quite useful if something goes wrong in the future. I thought aloud. Will do, sir. Next, the shipyard we've leased for our cover as PMC are working its schedule so far, though there are some concerns about the chips. In order to produce them at the necessary quality, we need a certain rare crystal. My people are experimenting with substitutes. Some modern chips, for example, have better characteristics, but they tell me the architecture is different, and if we're to use them, the silencer would need a moderate redesign, which would require resources and time we currently don't have. Just get me as many silencer-equipped ships as humanly possible before the Confederacy strikes. I hope that after the dust settles I'll have more assets to work with. Either that or I'll be executing my go-to-help plans. Bo, who had been quite bored during the reports so far, perked up. You've been talking about that silencer a lot. What exactly is it? My wife asked. Care to do the honors, Captain? I asked Trek. It will be pleasure, sir. The clone stood up and went to the desk in the back of the compartment. He activated the terminal and played a video for my wife. This, my dear, is what my people were working towards since I became a general. I smiled in satisfaction. Bo whistled when she saw a recording of the silencer's latest test firing. We could have used it at Mandalore. Unfortunately, the prototype was still a couple of weeks from being ready, Ma'am. Trek explained. A pity, Bo sighed. On the other hand, now it will be a nasty surprise for the Confederacy. I'm counting on it. My smile became feral. How many of those toys do you have? Bo asked. That would be telling, my dear. It's a surprise, I teased. RK equals. Part 4. Officer Quarters. Cruiser Remembrance. En route to Tython. Hyperspace. Tell me about this sash of yours. Bo asked. My wife was cuddled next to me in a rather distracting manner on the small bed in the quarters we were staying for the duration of the trip. My former master's. She's complicated. Zash was one of the sanest Sith Lords I knew, one of the most dangerous too. It was under her guidance I became powerful and cunning enough to face against Dark Council members and not only survive but kill them, I said. Was that longing for a past long gone I could hear in my voice? I didn't take you for the melancholic sort, love. Bo shifted and rested her head on my chest so she could look me in the eyes. I shouldn't be surprised, though. People don't really think about where you came from, do they? Don't know or don't care that everything you fought for, everything you achieved had been dust for the longest time. True, dear. There were moments when I wondered, what the hell am I doing here? I've been going through the motions, plotting, seeking power, because that's what Sith do. Yet, I had no real purpose. No reason to fight, beyond enjoying the act itself. I smiled fondly. You and the Mandalorian people gave me a purpose. Made my life much more complicated too. I'm glad to be of service. How much trouble is Zash going to be? Bo asked. It depends. Unless she's changed significantly, Zash would be more interested in continuing her research more than anything. Though not unlike myself, she'll likely seek enough power and a position secure enough to ensure that no one would criff with her without thinking long and hard. How she'll go about it, that's going to be complicated. If the Jedi overreact as I expect them to do, things are going to get ugly. I don't know. If she offers her services to the Republic, like you did, she might do all right. Bo looked thoughtful. You're Mandalore. Why don't you offer her a job? Finance her research or something and offer her a quiet place to play with her toys in exchange of aiding us. If Zash agrees, that would be a delicious irony. I used to be her errand boy for years, even if I was well paid and offered some vital training in better understanding and using the Force in exchange. I beamed at my wife. That's a splendid idea, my love. I leaned forward and caught her lips in a kiss. We didn't get much sleep that night. RK equals. Outer System. Tython. It took us 5 days, 2 of which I spent concentrating through the Force over a nav computer to create a course that wouldn't see us end in a star, black hole or smeared through half the galactic core. By the time I finished, my head was about to explode and I was down for our final leg of the journey while recovering in bed. Yet, it worked. When we exited hyperspace I could feel we were in the right place even before our sensors could give us a clear image of the system. Captain, I want the place saturated with sensor probes. Get recon flights out and keep in constant contact with them. There's only one inhabitable planet in the system. Take us there but do your best to mask our approach for as long as possible. I want constant nav updates for an emergency jump out of system if we run into something we can't handle. There's something or someone familiar and disturbing in the region, I ordered. On it, sir. The captain went on to issue his own set of orders. Bo? I asked. We're ready, Mandalore. Command us. My wife answered formally. She was wearing the same armor she fought me in and was armed to the teeth, just like my Mandalorian security detail. We're ready to go too, General. Lieutenant Oleg, the commander of the clone platoon that would provide me with more punch and tactical options, announced. It was unfortunate, but my Spec Ops ships simply didn't have enough personnel for anything resembling full ground complement. The troopers assigned to my handful of cruisers could barely cover internal security, much less fight a proper ground campaigns. That was the price paid for reasonable amount of secrecy. Is our objective here as expected, sir? Trek asked me. She's here. I can sense her presence, I said and closed my eyes. I concentrated on the force and used it to expand my awareness far beyond the ship I was on. Tython felt wild, untamed. I could feel both sides of the force clashing on the planet's surface and causing an upheaval. This world was truly unique in the galaxy. I stilled my wandering mind and concentrated on the familiar presence of my former master. Even with Tython in the background, or perhaps because of it, I could easily divine her presence. Zash was in orbit. Either on station or ship. The familiar and disturbing presence grew sharper. It was quite close to Zash. I shifted my awareness and pushed. The image of a woman's face, one framed by graying red hair, flashed through my mind. She was much older than I remembered, but there was no mistaking the woman. Kira Carson. My concentration slipped as I felt overwhelming fury. Where that woman went, her accursed husband wouldn't be far behind. I snarled and the dark side rose around me in glee. Jedi Master Jared Parian, the man who killed the Emperor. The same bastard who argued for the assassination of my first wife and helped persuade his friends in Republic Special Operations to greenlight the operation. The one criffing Jedi I couldn't get before finding myself in the future. I laughed. His precious wife was somehow here, close to Zash. Captain, flank speed. I want concentrated sensor sweeps over the planet. There's either a ship or space station over the South Pole. I want you to plot a hyperspace jump right on top of it. Disable its weapons and clear us a way for landing. Kill anything that gets in range until we come back, I hissed my orders. The people on the bridge were giving me uneasy glances. Even people blind to the Force could sense the rage I emanated and feel the temperature falling rapidly while the dark side raged around me. I didn't care. My vengeance was finally at hand. Delcatur, what the griff? My wife exclaimed. I turned to look her in the eyes and she flinched. That gave me pause. I examined Bo, then grit my teeth and took control of my emotions. I don't know how the griff is possible, but one of the people responsible for the murder of my first wife is in here, close to our objective. I took a deep breath. The primary mission stays the same, recover Zash. However, I'm expanding it. I want the computer core of that ship, base, whatever sliced in and as much information taken. I'll be dealing with any rogue Jedi who try to stop us. Bo looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. We'll talk about it later. Your orders will be executed, Mandalore.